What is Restore Childhood, and why did you feel the need to set up the charity?
Restore Childhood is a nonprofit organization that we founded about a year ago now to restore children's normalcy and fight back against unscientific mandates that have been plaguing kids across blue areas, which is, I know blue is different in the UK versus the US, but here, Democrat-run areas across the country where we're still facing mandates and restrictions for kids.
So explain to us what that looks like for you, Natalya, because here we think, well, life has largely gone back to normal. Kids are at school, masks are not being worn, there are no vaccine mandates anymore. How is it there now?
Well, I live in New York City, so most of the mandates have largely gone away, the city and the state mandates. I mean, last year, kids couldn't even get into a restaurant in New York City or a show if they didn't have a vaccine card. And that started in December of last year, in 2021 now, and lasted through much of last year, and then extended to 6-month-olds when we had 6-month-old vaccines under EUA, but masks were worn by children in schools up until June of 2022, so just about 6 months ago, for kids from 5 to 12. And for toddlers in New York City, and that's 2 and up, those children were masked the entire academic year last year, so from September through June of last year. So it was just insane. And while these mask mandates have gone away and the vaccine mandates have gone away, many small businesses and theaters and businesses that cater to children are still enforcing some of these mandates on their own. And that's just New York City. California still has, some of these like spotty mandates in democratic areas as well. They've brought back mask mandates for some college students here in upstate New York at SUNY Purchase, which is a state university of New York. They brought back a mask mandate just a couple of weeks ago to keep kids safe, apparently, even though these kids were finally getting back to normal. The State University of New York has a vaccine mandate for students, but not faculty and staff. Yes, that's true. Students, the ones who are the most vulnerable to the mandates and the least vulnerable to COVID. And now, most shockingly, mask mandates have been brought back in really kind of like the poor urban areas around the country. So Camden, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Sacramento, California has said that they would remask because they still have this crazy color tier system. Parts of Massachusetts, some of the poorest parts. So it's not over. And now I don't know if the UK press is reporting it this way, but in the US, the press has really fallen in love with this term triple-demic. And now they're talking about masking forever. So that would be first. In case you don't know what the triple-demic is, it's RSV, COVID, and the flu.
Okay. I know, Natalya, it's so obvious to me why masks are a problem for children and why people like us have to fight to make it clear that children do not need to wear them. But just remind our viewers, in your research with your evidence-based analysis that you've now done for over a year, what are the disadvantages for children to wear masks?
Well, number one, it's unpleasant. I mean, the fact is, like, there's a reason why we have a nose and mouth. And you remember Halloween masks always have those parts of your face cut out. Those are the parts that are open, not the parts that are closed. So we've done, many different initiatives. One of them has been helping organize a group called Urgency of Normal, which is a group of infectious disease and pediatric ER doctors and researchers across the country and in the UK and Canada. And there's not one shred of evidence that these these masks are even remotely effective. When they've looked at two different school districts that are fairly comparable and looked at whether there was increased transmission in the mask optional school district versus the one with the mandate, they really saw no correlation between transmission rate and mask wearing. But children really need to be able to learn how to enunciate. They need to be able to smile at people and have teachers smile back at them. That's not happening when faces are masked. And by the way, while there isn't a mask mandate going on for anyone here in New York City right now, most teachers, at least in the schools that my kids go to, are still masking. So the kids can't see how they move their mouths. It's a huge disadvantage for people who are acquiring English as a second language. We've also spent time talking to the hard of hearing and deaf community, and they feel like they've been left behind. Nobody cares. They're struggling. If they're reading lips, how can they do that with a mask on? Speech therapy. I mean, so many areas are still forcing children to get speech therapy with a mask on. I mean, if that's not an oxymoron, I don't know what is.
And sometimes here, when I host discussions on masks, to say that there is no evidence that they do any good, and there is a lot of evidence to say that they do a lot of bad, and people say, well, they've been wearing them in China for years, and it hasn't done them any harm. And my answer to that is, I don't want to live in China. There's a lot about Chinese culture that I don't think we need to import here, and particularly.
And how do they know? And how do they know it hasn't done them any harm? It's kind of like the people who were saying, you guys had your schools open mostly. We had schools in some areas closed for over a year. And some people were saying, my child is thriving in remote. And all I kept saying was, how do you know? How do you judge that within a few months? To come back to me in 10 years and let me know how your kid did after being locked in remote for over a year. And then we can make that decision.